I was talking to a guy named Mark recently, and he shared a story that was honestly painful to listen to. For his 5th wedding anniversary, he did exactly what society tells a good husband to do. He bought his wife a sensible, reliable car to replace her breaking down vehicle. He was the rock, the provider, the safe bet. But just a week later at a party, the reality of his situation hit him like a physical blow. Mark found himself standing on the sidelines while his wife spent nearly an hour completely captivated by the bartender, a guy with tattoos sleeping down his arms who, as Mark bitterly noted, probably couldn't spell 401k. The look on her face wasn't the comfortable affection she showed Mark. It was a spark of raw, giddy excitement. In that moment, despite the mortgage he paid and the stability he guaranteed, Mark felt completely invisible. He was the one she built a life with, yet she was mesmerized by the man who simply screamed danger. It's easy to look at that scene and judge her for being unfaithful in spirit or to judge him for being the boring choice. But what if I told you that the tension in that room wasn't actually about Mark, his wife, or their marriage? What if this wasn't a conscious moral failing, but a biological conspiracy, written into our very DNA? There is a controversial evolutionary theory suggesting that what Mark witnessed was an ancient, ruthless script running in the background, a dual strategy that dictates exactly why a woman secures the provider for survival, but instinctively craves the Chad for genetics. Okay, let's unpack this. I mean, that story of Mark just feeling completely invisible despite offering what he thought was absolute security. It's the perfect way into our deep dive today. Our mission is to really investigate the science behind this primal tension, this so-called biological conspiracy, by looking at how evolutionary psychology tries to explain this tug of war between desire and, long-term commitment.
And it is a real tug of war. This is a field that is frankly rife with debate, and we are going to dive straight into that controversy today. We're looking at this conflict through a pretty powerful stack of research, starting with the broadest framework, which is known as strategic pluralism.
Strategic pluralism, right?
Right. It's this idea that humans, unlike a lot of other species, don't just have one mating strategy. We employ a whole menu of them, not just, a single universal system like lifelong monogamy.
A menu. I like that. So after we establish that foundation, then we get into the theory that really tries to explain Mark's specific tension, right? The biological split between desire and commitment.
Exactly. That's the ovulatory shift hypothesis. It provides the proposed mechanism for that whole provider for survival, superior genes for reproduction idea.
We have to talk about the huge scientific debate around it, the reproducibility crisis, the methodological problems that have frankly just played the field and led to a real crisis of confidence in some of these findings.
Absolutely. It's a critical part of the story. And then, and this is crucial, we'll spend a good amount of time looking at the powerful competing explanation for infidelity and relationship dissatisfaction. It's one that many researchers today find much more compelling. The mate-switching hypothesis.
Mate-switching. So this is a totally different way of looking at it.
Completely. It reframes infidelity not as this quick quest for better genes, but as a much more long-term risk management strategy. A deeply evolved mechanism designed to transition from a poor partnership to a better one. To really get a handle on the tension we see in modern relationships, you have to wind the clock way back to the ancestral environment.
Because our brains are essentially still running on that old software.
That's a good way to put it. And what's fascinating is the idea that lifelong exclusive monogamy, it doesn't seem to characterize the primary mating pattern of humans. Instead, the evidence we have strongly suggests the human mating menu is complex, it's varied. We evolved to use a whole range of tactics.
So not just one size fits all.
Not at all. We're talking short flings, serial monogamy, occasional infidelity, and yes, of course, long-term pair bonding. This core framework, strategic pluralism, suggests our ancestors had to pursue two simultaneous and often conflicting goals just because life was so incredibly precarious.
So you're saying this is like an evolutionary plan A and a plan B, and they're running at the same time, even inside one person's head.
That's a perfect analogy.
You mentioned life was harsh. What were those specific competing goals that forced us to evolve these different strategies?
Well, plan A was all about one thing, survival. Period.
Making it to the next day.
Exactly. In the ancestral world, a woman needed to secure reliable investment, physical protection, and just essential resources, food, shelter, safety, from a committed long-term partner. Think about it, pregnancy and lactation are just immensely metabolically costly. And raising a defenseless child to independence in a dangerous world, that required a team effort.
A committed father figure was absolutely crucial, not just for resources, but for protecting the mother and child from, what, predators, other hostile groups.
Both predators and hostile human outgroups. So that partnership, it really wasn't about romance in the modern sense. It was a necessary economic and physical survival mechanism.
One that just vastly increased the odds of your offspring surviving. It's hard to overstate how big a difference a second reliable provider makes when you don't know where your next meal is coming from.
It's everything. Therefore, the long-term mating strategy, Plan A, demanded that women prioritize traits that guaranteed consistent investment and commitment.
Okay, so what kind of traits are we talking about here?
We're talking about dependability, ambition, reliable economic provisioning, whatever, that looked like in a tribal context, and, demonstrable good parenting skills. These are the qualities that ensured your lineage survived.
Okay, so that's Plan A, the sensible, reliable choice, the mark in our opening story. But then you have Plan B.
Then you have Plan B, the second biological imperative, which is focused on genetic fitness.
Getting the best possible DNA.
Exactly. If you've already secured the provider, the next step in the evolutionary game is ensuring your offspring are robust, attractive, dominant. Giving them the best chance not just to survive, but to reproduce successfully themselves. That's how you maximize your genetic legacy.
This is where things get messy, because this is where we have to introduce the concept of, well, an affair.
Right. What we call extra-pair copulation, or EPC. It's the scientific term, and it's the necessary mechanism to try and fulfill Plan B when your Plan A partner is already secured, but maybe genetically lacking.
Now, for men, the evolutionary logic of EPC seems pretty straightforward, right? They evolved a desire for sexual variety because they can maximize their reproductive output with, pretty minimal investment.
Historically, that was the drive. A man could, in theory, spread his genes very widely with a low initial cost.
But there are still risks for men, right? It's not a free-for-all.
Oh, absolutely. It's critical to remember male infidelity still comes with big risks. Things like SPIs, violence from cuckolded partners, and of course the loss of that enhanced child-rearing environment that a committed long-term mate provides. That ultimately reduces the survival probability of any one of his children.
Okay, but female EPC, that's on another level of risk entirely. It's exponentially more costly.
Right.
The risks are just massive, potentially putting the woman's own survival and the lives of her existing children in jeopardy.
The costs are multifaceted and severe. Biologically, there's the risk of injury or sexually transmitted infections. Socially, there's the risk of social shame, the potential loss of the long-term mate's absolutely crucial investment.
Which could mean starvation.
It could mean starvation or exposure for her and her children. And then there's the most tragic risk: partner violence or even homicide due to sexual jealousy.
And the research backs this up, right? Infidelity is a leading cause of intimate partner violence.
Consistently.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, if she's divorced or cast out, she could have a lowered bride price or just be seen as less desirable for any future partners.
So if the costs are that catastrophic, then female EPC must yield some kind of significant offsetting benefits to even begin to justify that level of risk.
Precisely. And that necessity is why these theories, the dual mating strategy and the others, were developed in the first place.
To explain this massive gamble.
Exactly. And that leads us to the two main theories that try to explain why a woman would endure such risks. The first, and this is the foundation of that biological conspiracy idea we started with, is the good genes hypothesis.
This is the core of the dual mating strategy.
It is. The woman secures genetic benefits, superior, high-fitness DNA from a dominant, attractive male, while at the same time maintaining the investment, the protection, and the resources from her stable, long-term partner.
The best of both worlds, genetically and materially.
In theory, yes. And the second theory is a bit more pragmatic. It's called resource acquisition.
Resource acquisition. So this is less about genetics and more about stuff.
More about immediate, tangible, short-term benefits, things you need for survival or comfort right now.
Yeah.
This could mean securing extra protection during a time of conflict, getting supplemental food, or even just obtaining better nesting materials from another male. We see this a lot in the animal kingdom. So let's now turn our attention to the specific biological mechanism that's supposed to govern that good gene strategy, the one that would make this whole dual strategy possible.
Okay.
It's called the ovulatory shift hypothesis, or OS. The premise here is that a woman's attraction, her desire mechanisms, they aren't static. They dynamically adjust based on her immediate biological conception risk.
Leading to a temporary but powerful shift in her preference.
A powerful shift.
So this is the biological switch that allegedly makes the boring but dependable husband suddenly lose his luster. When does this switch flip, and what exactly does it start prioritizing?
The shift is tied to the fertile window, the high conception risk period. Now, this is typically standardized as being between days 8 and 20 of the menstrual cycle, though we have to say that timing itself is a source of massive controversy that we will get to.
Right.
But during this phase, hormonal changes, especially the surge in estrogen, are hypothesized to activate this. Laser-like focus on cues that signal superior genetic quality.
So what kind of cues are we talking about?
This means a sharp increase in preference for markers like extreme masculinity, social dominance, physical symmetry, imposing features, the Chad traits, essentially.
And the research suggests that during this fertile window, women actually report a marked increase in sexual desire, but specifically directed towards men other than their long-term partner.
It's a literal physiological expression of that good gene script running in the background, yes.
It's almost like the body is saying, okay, provider is secured, now's our chance for a genetic upgrade.
That's the logic of the hypothesis. And we can see this play out in the context of, well, availability. There was a key initial finding that we have to look at from Brisson and Stranieri back in 2008.
What did they find?
They looked at a very subtle preference, whether women preferred a potential short-term partner to be single or already attached.
And what did that tell them about the strategy?
They found that partnered women who are in their high fertility window showed a preference for men described as single over those described as attached.
Why single?
The logic is that an available single man is a lower-cost option for an affair. There's no messy entanglement with another woman, which could potentially minimize the social fallout.
So the preference shift supports the OSH's claim. The mechanism is designed to increase the benefits of adultery over its costs, precisely when the odds of conceiving a genetically superior child are at their highest.
That's the argument.
What's really fascinating to me is that this shift isn't just an internal preference, it's supposedly reflected externally. The woman's own mate value seems to increase during this fertile window.
That's right. There are subtle, measurable physical changes. The skin might appear healthier, what some people describe as a glow.
Okay.
Some studies show the waist-to-hip ratio slightly decreases, which makes the body shape perceived as more fertile. Even the pitch of a woman's voice tends to rise slightly.
And these are all subtle, unconscious cues that are broadcasting fertility.
Exactly. They enhance perceptions of beauty, effectively boosting her mate value and her attractiveness right at peak fertility.
And these physical changes are then coupled with some pretty clear behavioral shifts, right? Especially among women whose partners are, to be blunt, less attractive.
The behavioral implications are indeed strongest among women whose long-term partners are perceived as having a lower mate value. These women show stronger shifts.
Like what?
They're more likely to evade their primary partner's mate guarding efforts. They might complain he's being clingy or possessive, and this happens to peak right around her peak fertility. They also report a greater interest in going to social events where they might meet other men, and they show increased flirtation with men who aren't their primary partner.
This just ties back so perfectly to Mark's experience at the party. Mark provides the stability, the car, the mortgage, but his wife is being pulled by this ancient mechanism, her behavior being magnetically drawn to the chaotic, imposing bartender. It might not be a conscious rejection of Mark at all.
It could be an illustration of this potential biological echo.
A push toward genetic fitness cues that makes Mark's necessary stability feel, just for a moment, biologically irrelevant or even boring.
And that framework, that idea, it really dominated the field for about a decade. But now we have to talk about the intense scientific backlash. Because the ovulatory shift hypothesis is, well, it's one of the most intensely debated topics in the field. A large body of contemporary research, including some really critical meta-analyses, suggests that the effects that were reported, particularly the preference shifts for traits like high masculinity and dominance,
it might not be real.
They might not be robust. The findings are highly mixed. Many attempts have failed to replicate those dramatic shifts that first put OSH on the map.
So this whole area of evolutionary psychology has become a kind of scientific battleground over methodology. It raises serious questions about whether these shifts are real phenomena or if they're just statistical illusions created by flawed research.
That's the heart of the debate. Critics point directly to the issues surrounding what they call experimenter degrees of freedom.
That sounds like a polite way of saying researchers are fudging the numbers.
It's an academic term for having too much flexibility in how you collect, process, and analyze your data. And it can often result in something called p-hacking.
P-hacking. That's unintentionally or intentionally finding a correlation that looks significant but is actually just random noise, right? A type 1 error.
Precisely.
Can you give us a concrete example of where this flexibility shows up in OSH research?
It's evident in several crucial steps. For one, the very definition of the fertile phase is a major point of contention.
How so?
Well, researchers sometimes switch their methods. Instead of forward counting from the start of menstruation, they might use backward counting, going back 14 days from the predicted next period. They also apply different rounding rules for cycle days.
And those minor calculation differences can actually change the outcome.
They can arbitrarily move a woman's data point from the high fertility group to the low fertility group, or vice versa. And sometimes that's enough to create a false effect that only appears in the group the researcher wants to highlight.
So if a researcher gets a result that's almost significant, they might just tweak the counting method until the data falls into the fertile window in a way that gives them the result they want.
I'm not saying it's always conscious, but that flexibility absolutely compromises the integrity of the finding.
It definitely raises suspicion.
And there's another major issue: the use of what are called essential moderators. These are variables that seem to magically appear or disappear across studies just to make the findings significant.
For example?
Well, often the robust effects only seem to appear when researchers restrict the finding to only partnered women, or only when asking about a short-term mating context.
But that's not consistent.
The problem is the use and the effects of these key moderators are totally inconsistent. They're included in one study and then just ignored in the next, often by the very same research teams. It leads to a very, very shaky body of evidence.
We actually have a remarkable case that illustrates exactly how serious these problems can be. It brings us back to that original Bressan and Straneri study about fertile partnered women preferring single men.
Yes, a classic example. The initial attempt to replicate that specific finding, which was conducted by the high-profile reproducibility project, it failed. They couldn't find the original effect.
And for a while, that was held up as proof that the OSH effect was just flawed, right?
It was. But the failure itself was invalidated when people took a closer, more detailed look. Because the replication study contained a massive, unforeseen bias in how the stimulus materials were allocated.
Photos of men.
The photos of the men.
So walk us through that. What did the reanalysis find about the data bias in that replication attempt?
Okay, so the researchers had used 4 photo albums of men, all with varying attractiveness and relationship status single versus attached. The hypothesis, remember, was about fertile partnered women.
Right.
However, due to a massive undiscovered data error in the replication, the albums that contained the most attractive single men were disproportionately shown to fertile unpartnered women, not the fertile partnered women they were supposed to be studying.
You're kidding. So the critical data, the women who were the main test of the hypothesis, they were basically denied access to the high-value single men, while another group that was totally irrelevant to the core question was flooded with them.
Precisely. This statistical accident created a spurious fertility effect that looked compelling for the unpartnered women, while at the same time completely obscuring the ability to detect the original interaction for the partnered group. The result was a false failure to replicate. And the key takeaway here isn't just that the initial study might have been right all along. It's that sometimes data from a perfectly well-designed study can be rendered completely unable to speak to the question of interest because of these unexpected gross confounds.
That level of scrutiny is just essential. It tells us that OSH might not be as fragile as the replication crisis initially suggested, but it demands far, far better methodology.
It does. And given this ongoing scrutiny, we're seeing OSH proponents start to evolve their underlying theoretical stance, which is arguably the biggest shift of all.
How so?
They're now moving away from the idea that masculinity signals good genes through something called the immunocompetence handicap hypothesis, or ICHH.
The ICHH. Can you remind us what that is?
Of course. The ICHH was the foundational mechanism. The theory stated that high testosterone actually suppresses the immune system, so only the most genetically fit men could flourish and display all those masculine traits despite having that biological handicap.
So it was a way of proving you had great genes, like a peacock's tail.
Exactly. That was a neat evolutionary logic for why a woman would find a very masculine man genetically superior.
But they're shifting away from that now. Why?
Because recent work just doesn't consistently support the biological link between extreme masculinity and true verifiable genetic quality in humans. The mechanism linking observable traits like a square jaw to actual offspring viability, it's becoming increasingly tenuous.
So the whole foundation is shaky.
And this has forced OSH proponents to make a critical concession. They're now suggesting that the ovulatory shift mechanism may have evolved in our non-pair-bonded ancestors way back when our species was more promiscuous.
Whoa, that is a profound theoretical adjustment. Because if the preference mechanism evolved in a context where males didn't provide commitment or resources,
it implies that the existence of an ovulatory shift in preferences today does not necessarily predict high rates of infidelity in modern humans.
so the shift might exist as a kind of evolutionary echo.
But the necessity for high-risk ETC to gain those genes may be largely obsolete in a species that is now primarily pair-bonded.
That just fundamentally weakens the original biological conspiracy argument. It suggests that while the biological preference might flicker, it doesn't necessarily dictate behavior in a social system that's built on commitment and resource provisioning.
Exactly. The shift might exist, but its practical predictive power for marital infidelity in the modern world may be far, far lower than initially believed.
So this heavy criticism of the OSH, the mixed evidence for the good genes hypothesis, it really forces us to pivot, doesn't it?
It does.
If the dual mating strategy is either too inconsistent in the lab or just too small in its effect size, and especially when you consider how low non-paternity rates actually are globally.
Which suggests affairs rarely result in conception.
Right. Then infidelity must be serving another primary, more powerful evolutionary function. And this is what leads us to the mate switching hypothesis, or MSH.
MSH offers a very compelling alternative. It posits that infidelity and relationship dissatisfaction are psychological adaptations designed primarily to assess the viability of transitioning from a current mate to a demonstrably better replacement.
So this is a cold, pragmatic survival strategy.
Very much so. It's a domain-specific elaboration of the walk-away strategy we see in numerous other species, and it's designed to abandon costly or failing partners.
So infidelity isn't necessarily about the spark or lust or even superior genes.
Yeah.
It's about unconsciously, or maybe consciously, auditioning for a better long-term life, securing a partner with a higher net value.
That is the essence of it. And the MSH successfully explains several key facts that the OSH really struggles to reconcile.
Like what?
First, let's look at the primary driver of infidelity: relationship dissatisfaction. Study after study consistently shows that marital dissatisfaction is the single most powerful predictor of female infidelity. If a woman is unhappy, she is highly likely to seek alternatives.
But the comparison to men is what makes that finding so critical, isn't it?
It is. The exact same studies show that men who have affairs do not differ significantly from men who abstain in their reported levels. It seems male infidelity is driven more by opportunity and a desire for variety, which fits that low-investment EPC model we talked about. But female infidelity appears to be driven by a desire to exit an unhappy state. It supports the idea of a search for an improvement in their long-term situation.
The emotional stakes seem to underscore this difference even further. There's a huge gap in the level of commitment to the affair partner, right?
The emotional involvement is drastically different. Roughly 70% of women who initiate affairs report falling in love with their affair partner.
70%, and for men.
That's only about 30%.
Wow.
That profound emotional entanglement strongly suggests women are seeking a new, committed, long-term partner, an upgrade, not just genetic benefits from a fleeting, low-investment fling. They are preparing for a switch.
And the qualities they look for in an affair partner also seem to reinforce that long-term replacement goal, rather than just raw masculine genetics. They're not just looking for the most dominant Chad who can't hold a job.
That's correct. When researchers look at the traits women prioritize in their affair partners, they are consistently the traits necessary for long-term provision and security.
Like what?
Dependability, emotional stability, high status, success, resource potential. These traits mirror the exact attributes they prioritize in a committed long-term mate.
So the evidence overwhelmingly supports the function of trading up, using the affair as a mechanism to secure a better permanent partner, not just for genetic cuckoldry.
That's the argument, yes.
The decision calculus for this kind of trade-up seems incredibly complex. It requires continuously monitoring not just your partner's mate value, but also your own, because mate value is fluid. Nothing in mating is static.
That's a key point.
Let's look at the first trigger, a decline in the partner's value. We could use the story of James, the finance executive.
Right. James was the epitome of resource security. He built a fortress of wealth and stability, providing everything his wife could possibly need.
The perfect provider.
The perfect provider. But then he suffered a catastrophic business setback, a major financial loss, and a public scandal that just severely damaged his reputation and his confidence. His wife's reaction wasn't pity. It was pragmatic survival instinct activating.
Her perception of him changed almost immediately. The resources didn't vanish entirely, but his future trajectory did. She perceived a sudden, dangerous cancellation of the insurance policy he represented.
And long-term mate selection, from an evolutionary perspective, is all about that future trajectory. When a partner's ability to provide protection, status, or resources suffers a calamitous setback, the mate-switching adaptation activates.
Because the cost of staying might suddenly outweigh the benefits.
Exactly. James's decline triggered an appraisal process in his wife that was designed to find a partner who could restore that trajectory of upward resource acquisition.
And the reverse is also true, right? An increase in a woman's own mate value can trigger the same process. Say she gets a big promotion, becomes financially successful, or dramatically improves her fitness.
Yes. Monitoring your self-mate value is essential to the MSH. If a woman's value increases, she elevates her mating standards.
And her current partner might not meet those new standards.
She may find herself dissatisfied with a partner who was perfectly adequate before her own success. Her attraction to alternatives increases because her internal assessment program is telling her she can now successfully secure a higher value mate.
So she's still pursuing an upgrade, but the trigger is her own success, not necessarily his failure.
Correct. However, the MSH fully recognizes that this strategy carries immense, sometimes deadly costs, which have to be very carefully managed.
What are those costs again?
The costs of switching are severe. She risks loss of social support from friends and family tied to the original partnership, reputational damage. Divorced women are often seen as lower mate value in many cultures, and again, that immense risk of violence.
We have to keep reiterating this point. Infidelity is the leading cause of intimate partner violence.
And following the discovery of an affair, women face a significantly greater risk of violence and homicide than men do. And if children are involved, remating exposes those children to the recognized risks associated with step-parent abuse. These are heavy, heavy constraints on the mate-switching decision.
Okay, so given these potentially deadly costs, the mate-switching hypothesis would have to predict that women have evolved some pretty intricate cognitive and behavioral mechanisms, things designed specifically to manage the transition and mitigate those severe risks.
It does, and one crucial tactic is cultivating what researchers clinically call backup mates.
A backup mate. So an insurance policy.
Yes, the backup mate hypothesis suggests that people, even those who report being highly satisfied in their current relationship, benefit psychologically from actively cultivating potential replacements. It functions as an emotional and practical insurance policy, recognizing that life and love offer no guarantees. Resources or health can change in an instant.
And how common is this? It sounds incredibly cynical to maintain a whole roster of alternatives while you're supposed to be committed.
It is a dark, pragmatic reflection of our evolved psychology. But studies consistently show that both sexes report cultivating, on average, roughly 3 potential backup mates.
3.
3. These are people who, if the current relationship ended, would be viable romantic partners.
And women seem to be more proprietary about those backups, which suggests they view them as a really crucial resource.
They absolutely do. Research indicates women are significantly more likely than men to report that they would actively try to prevent their primary backup mate from entering a long-term relationship or marrying someone else.
So they're keeping them on the bench.
It preserves that backup mate's value as an available high-quality alternative, ready to step in should the primary mate fail or be ejected.
And the affairs themselves, under this hypothesis, they serve as tactical tools. They're like trial runs or low-stakes assessments before you make the high-cost decision to actually switch.
Exactly. The affair acts as an information gathering phase. It allows a woman to gain accurate, close-up data about an alternative mate's true value, his emotional interest, his compatibility, his resource potential, all before she commits to the costly process of divorce or breakup.
It's a mechanism to minimize risk by reducing the uncertainty.
Precisely. And finally, when the decision is made to leave, the MSH predicts specific exit tactics designed to minimize the rage, the vengeance, and the potential violence from the rejected partner.
Which is a very real threat.
A very real threat. These exit tactics are crucial for survival. Strategies like the familiar cliche, "it's not you, it's me," or emphasizing that the breakup is about self-discovery.
Right, trying to soften the blow.
They are proposed to minimize the ire of the scorned partner by redirecting the blame away from the mate switch and towards some internal, less threatening cause.
And what are some other tactics?
Another observed tactic is attempting to transform the romantic relationship into a friendship, or even, in some cases, continuing to provide sexual favors to the ex-partner. It's all designed to minimize the perceived rejection and reduce the potentially deadly costs that come with being the one who initiates the breakup.
It just paints a picture of mate choice that is so much less romantic than we like to believe. It's much more focused on continuous risk assessment and resource management. And this brings us back to the synthesis of all these strategies, the complex interplay between these ancient, evolved programs and the hyper-stable modern life we've engineered. This tension is maybe best illustrated by the story of James, the high-flying finance executive, and his wife, Elena.
Elena was the epitome of security. Her life was predictable, safe, lavish. Yet she confessed to feeling a profound void. She craved unpredictability, excitement, chaos. This is what we can call the golden cage problem.
The golden cage problem.
James perfectly fulfilled the ancient provider contract. He was plan A, executed to perfection.
But in a contemporary society where basic survival shelter, food, protection from immediate violence, is largely guaranteed by infrastructure and legal systems, the primary evolutionary currency of the long-term partner, which is sheer, reliable stability and resource hoarding, it just loses its fundamental potency as an aphrodisiac.
When survival is guaranteed, the mating psychology, instead of being satisfied and settling, it simply pivots. It begins searching for the genetic or the emotional spark that risk seems to provide.
So Elena craved unpredictability. His extreme competence became, paradoxically, his penalty.
The very stability he offered ceased to be a high-value mating cue and instead became a psychological irritant.
So whether we look at the wandering eye, the dissatisfaction, the attraction to the bartender in Mark's story, through the lens of the dual mating strategy, where you're seeking superior short-term genes,
or the mate-switching hypothesis, where you're seeking a better long-term replacement,
the fundamental constant is that human desire is never static. It is a continuously running biological program that is designed to optimize fitness.
That's the uncomfortable truth, isn't it? Humans evolved adaptations for constant mate appraisal and potential switching, not for lifelong, static matrimonial bliss.
We descend from ancestors who are constantly monitoring their partner's mate value, tracking their own levels of dissatisfaction, appraising alternatives, and acting when the calculated benefits clearly outweigh the severe costs of making a switch.
And this psychology is why the boredom, the dissatisfaction, or that magnetic pull that Mark's wife felt, it's not necessarily malice or a character flaw.
It's the expression of a relentless biological program, one dedicated to constant optimization and appraisal.
The tension that Mark and James feel, that friction between the necessary security they provide and the volatile, fluctuating nature of desire, that is the inevitable collision between our ancient animalistic drive and the modern social contract of monogamy.
The stability, the mortgage, the sensible car. These modern efforts are valiant, but they're fighting against millions of years of biological programming that prioritizes optimizing genetic or resource potential.
The man who is seen as the rock is never truly safe from this hidden, continuously running calculus of survival and optimization.
The ultimate takeaway here seems to be that the very stability we prize and rely upon in our modern unions, the thing that guarantees survival, is often structurally decoupled from the volatile evolutionary triggers that generate intense desire. The job of the modern committed couple, then, isn't simply to maintain stability, it's to actively engineer a stability that doesn't become synonymous with irrelevance, actively creating the very emotional, intellectual, or genetic spark that biology sometimes assumes will be outsourced to a better set of genes or higher value replacement.